Well, it's official. Good cause eviction has passed in New York State and was signed by the governor earlier this week. This is a form of statewide rent control and tenancy for life, but is it as bad as it could have been for rental property owners? I'm going to break that down here. I've read the whole bill. I'm going to go item by item to explain for other rental property owners out there what this means for you, so stick around. My name is Ryan Vino. I'm the owner of Vino Properties. We are a full-service property management company that operates in the greater Albany, New York Capital District. I'm also a rental property owner. We own multiple rental properties. I have some legislative experience with the Apartments of New York and co-founder of the Capital Region Real Estate Investing Association. To give a quick background of what's going on here, for years now, going back to about 2019, the state legislature has been trying to introduce what's called good cause eviction. There have been a couple of states that have passed something similar, but New York has really been trying to pass one of the strictest versions of it in the country for years, and they just could not get it through the assembly. But a form of it has finally passed, and they got it through in this year's budget. Now let me start with my disclaimer. I am not an attorney. Do not take this to be legal advice. This is just me as a licensed property manager that has read the entire bill, and I'm going to give you sort of my opinions on what a lot of these items mean. But make sure before you take any action, talk to your own real estate attorney.
Better call Saul.
Some things to remember. This does not take effect unless your local municipality adopts good cause eviction. So you're going to have to pay attention to if your town decides to opt in, you're going to have to follow these guidelines. So a little about this bill. This was actually passed as part of the New York State budget for the 2025 fiscal year. It's about 206 pages is the entire piece. What we're going to be talking about today is just section HH, which refers to all of the good cause eviction piece. There's a lot of other stuff I'm going to do some other videos about, but for this particular video, we're just talking about the good cause eviction piece. So there are two main tenets of good cause eviction. One is rent control. The other is requiring that a rental property owner renew a lease in perpetuity. For all of these, there are a lot of exemptions and carve-outs that were included in this bill. So make sure you watch till the end, because not everything applies to everyone and every property and every location. The confusing part of this is when this applies and when it doesn't. So I'm going to cover first the two main tenets of good cause eviction, and then we'll go through all of the exemptions. So number one, the rent control piece. The limit on rent increases are 10% or the consumer price index for last year plus 5%, whichever is less. As long as you stay under those thresholds, you're good. If you do have a case for increasing rents above that, there is a mechanism in here where you can make a case for it based on increases in your costs or taxes. We'll get into that carve out in just a little bit. So the other piece is the requirement to renew a lease basically forever unless a tenant violates one of the good causes that they've identified in this bill. And I'm paraphrasing a little here, but I am reading from the bill. No landlord shall remove any tenant from housing accommodation except for good cause as defined in this next section. So basically says you can't remove anybody from possession unless it meets one of these good causes. Well, what are those good causes? We're going to go through them. Reason number one is that they didn't pay rent, provided that the landlord didn't increase rent unreasonably. What is unreasonable? It exceeds that 10% or the 5+ CPI limits that were established. As long as you stay under that, if your rent increase has been underneath that threshold and your tenant's not paying rent, then you can move forward with an eviction. Now there's a little caveat to that though, that if you can make a case for raising rents above that, say you just did a large project, there is a carve out here where you may be able to get a rent increase. Whenever a court considers whether a rent increase is unreasonable, the court may consider all relevant facts, including but not limited to a landlord's cost for fuel and other utilities, insurance and maintenance. But in all cases, the court shall consider the landlord's property tax and any recent increases, or to reflect completed significant repairs to the housing accommodation, provided that the landlord can establish that the repairs did not result from the landlord's failure to properly maintain the building or housing accommodation. And significantly repair means the replacement or substantial modification of any structural, electrical, plumbing, mechanical system that requires a permit from a governmental agency, or abatement of hazardous materials. So to summarize, If your expenses went up, especially your taxes, you may be able to make a case in front of a judge for an increase that's above those thresholds. Good cause number 2, the tenant is violating a substantial obligation of their tenancy or breaching any of the landlord's rules and regulations governing the premises, and has failed to cure such violation after written notice that the violation cease within 10 days of receipt of such notice. So what does this mean? That means if a tenant is violating their lease, you need to provide them with a 10-day notice to cure, which just means to stop doing whatever they're doing. And if they don't, then you can move to evict the tenant under a lease violation. Recommendation, make sure your lease is airtight. Any behavior that you don't want a tenant to undertake should be in your lease. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to point to that as a good cause for eviction. Good cause number 3, being a nuisance. The tenant is committing or permitting a nuisance in such housing accommodation or is maliciously or by reason of gross negligence substantially damaging the housing accommodation or causing damage elsewhere in the building or on real property. So if they're just being a pain, if they're causing all kinds of damage, if they're bothering other tenants, that is one of the good causes. The trouble here is that the onus is going to be on the rental property owner to prove this, which is very difficult. If you have kind of a crazy tenant who's harassing other tenants, harassing their neighbors, getting into fights, a lot of times the victims don't really want to come forward. They don't want to go to court. They don't want to sign an affidavit. If the judge doesn't grant the eviction, they've just aggravated a crazy neighbor. So this can be a little bit touchy. You're going to need to really make sure you're documenting everything, taking a lot of pictures, getting signed affidavits whenever you can, build a pretty strong case against tenants that are causing a nuisance. Good cause number 4, occupancy of the housing accommodation is in violation or causes a violation of law. So if it's illegal for them to be there, this presumably is if there's an order of protection preventing them to be there, if they're not allowed to be near a school, anything like that. If they're in violation of that, you'd be able to terminate their lease. Good cause number 5, the tenant is using or permitting the housing accommodation for an illegal purpose. So if they're doing something illegal, if they're cooking meth, you can evict them. You're just going to need evidence. Good cause number 6, the tenant has unreasonably refused the landlord access to the housing accommodation for the purpose of making repairs or improvements required by law, or for the purpose of showing the housing accommodation to a prospective purchaser, mortgagee, or other person having a legitimate interest therein. Okay, this one is going to be touchy. So what is an improvement required by law? Only things that violate code. That could be a little bit open up to interpretation here by a judge. I don't like how that one was written. Our company, we do annual inspections of every unit. Is that considered required by law? No, it's certainly not. Code inspections are, but we need to get in there once a year to make sure that they're taking care of the property. So if someone is refusing to provide access, as does happen, is that a case for good cause? There's a little bit of gray area here, so we'll have to see where the case law plays out. Good cause number 7, the landlord seeks in good faith to recover possession of a housing accommodation for their own personal use and occupancy as their principal residence, or there's a whole list of family members. However, not if the tenant is a disabled person or 65 or older. So you can terminate a tenant's lease so that you can live there unless they're disabled or over 65. Number 8, the landlord in good faith seeks to demolish the housing. So if you want to knock the housing down, that is one of the permitted causes to not renew a lease. Good cause number 9, similarly, the landlord seeks in good faith to withdraw a housing accommodation from the housing market. So both this and the demolition of the housing accommodation require clear and convincing evidence by the landlord of the reason to do so and the good faith that that's what you were going to do. So you can't just say, hey, we want to knock the house down, terminate somebody's lease, and then say, we changed our mind, and then just release it. That's a no-no, and there's another item in here pointing out the penalties for fraud in that case if you lie about your intent. Good cause number 10. Tenant fails to agree to reasonable changes to a lease at renewal, including increases in rent that are not unreasonable. So within that limit that was set prior, as long as written notices of the changes to the lease were provided to the tenant at least 30 days, but no more than 90 days, prior to the expiration of the current lease. So as long as it's reasonable, if they just refuse to sign the new lease, that can be a good cause. So that's it. Those are your 10 good causes outlined by the state as to when you have the option to not renew someone's lease. If you don't meet one of those good causes, got to renew their lease. Most important piece to all this, though, is who does this apply to? There are a lot of exemptions here. So the exemptions, if you're a small landlord, what a small landlord is defined as here is owning 10 or less units in the state. So if you own 10 or less units, then you are exempt from good cause eviction. There are still some disclosures you're going to have to pay attention to that I'm going to get into, but good cause eviction is not going to apply to you. If your property is owned by an LLC, or if you're in a partnership where there are multiple owners, if any of those owners own more than 10 units, then the entire entity or the entire partnership is going to be subject to good cause eviction. Number 2 is owner-occupied housing. You're an owner-occupant living in a property under 10 units, you're exempt. Exemption number 3 is if the unit is sublet and the lessor wants to recover the housing accommodation for their own personal use. Number 4 is if occupancy is solely incident to employment. This might be if you're a landlord and you have like a live-in maintenance technician or a live-in property manager. That's incident to employment. Exemption number 5 is for units that are already subject to other rent regulations. So this might be New York City or places that have other rent controls in effect, I guess. Exemption number 6, units within a housing accommodation where such unit must be affordable to tenants at a specific income level pursuant to statute. So if you have a low income housing contract, that is also exempt. Exemption number 7, which is kind of interesting, if it's a condo or a co-op. So if you're renting out your condo, you're exempt. Exemption number 8, and this one is a biggie, if the building was built after 2009 or if the certificate of occupancy was issued after January 1st, 2009, exempt. So there's probably gonna be a big difference in pricing for properties that were built in December of 2008 to January of 2009. That's a very, very big difference. If the property was built in 2009, it is exempted for 30 years. Exemption number 9 is if the unit is seasonal use. So if it's a seasonal property, you don't have to renew the lease when the lease expires. Exemption number 10 is hospitals, retirement communities, assisted living. It looks like any of those places are exempt from good cause eviction. Exemption number 11 is manufactured homes located on or in a manufactured home park. So it sounds like if you're renting out a mobile home, but that's exempt. Exemption number 12 is hotel rooms or transient use. Exemption 13, dorms. Exemption 14 is housing for a religious facility. Exemption number 15 is luxury housing that they specifically outline here that's 245% of market. So using real easy numbers, if market rent in your neighborhood is $1,000 a month, that means that if your rent is $2,450 or above, then you would be exempt because it's presumably super luxury housing. And that's it. The last piece is there's a whole bunch of new paperwork that goes along with this for everybody. And there are 2 pieces. One is a disclosure. And in this bill itself, which is a single-spaced eye chart, the disclosure is 8 pages long. So this is going to be required to be in every single new lease, every lease renewal, service of notice, 14-day notice, 5-day notice, every communication that you have that's documented with a tenant practically is now going to need to include this notice of whether your rental unit is subject to good cause or not. If it's not subject to good cause, you've got to check a bunch of boxes on here that say exactly why. And one of the most shocking pieces of this to me is if you're a small landlord and you want to be exempt, you have to list on this disclosure that you have to provide to your tenants all of the beneficial owners of that property and all of the other units that those beneficial owners own. So if you have an LLC to protect your identity so that a crazy tenant doesn't show up on your doorstep trying to kill you and your family, you now have to, on this disclosure, disclose not only exactly who you are, but who all of your partners may be and all the properties that they own. So even if you're a small landlord, I would imagine there's going to be an awful lot of small landlords that are going to say, I would rather not be exempt and I would rather be subject to good cause eviction than to just serve up my personal information and other assets that I own to some of these tenants. So this disclosure is going to be a headache. And the second piece of documentation that's going to have to become a thing is with every legal notice, if you are terminating a lease for good cause, there's a whole other notice form that you're going to have to provide that says which of the good causes did they violate? Did they violate the good cause of being a nuisance? Did they violate the one because they're not paying rent? And you're going to kind of have to make your whole case right on there, and that's going to have to go with any notices and with all of your court documentation. So the big takeaways here: rents are capped at the lesser of 10% or 5% plus the consumer price index. You are required to renew a tenant's lease unless they meet these handful of good causes. Your local municipality has to opt in for you to be subject to this, but whether you're subject to it or not, you are going to have to start providing disclosures in August of 2024 that tell all of your tenants why you are exempt if you are exempt. There are 15 exemptions to good cause eviction, but to claim an exemption, you are going to have to disclose that to your tenants. If this all seems like a lot for you to handle, that's what property managers like us are here for. If it just seems too much as a DIY landlord, New York is making it next to impossible to manage rentals yourself without hiring a professional. You can always call Vino Properties. We'd be happy to help you. And especially if you're going to continue to go it alone, absolutely you have to use an attorney for this stuff. We're going to be partnering very closely with our attorneys to rewrite a bunch of our documentation, rewrite a lot of our processes to make sure that we're following the right procedures. Again, I'm not an attorney. These are my opinions. These are kind of the things that we've outlined. This only just came out this week, so there's still a lot of question marks. There's still a little bit of interpretation going on, but it is definitely going to change the rental landscape in New York State. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you found this content helpful, please subscribe to our page. As a lot of these laws are changing, we're going to be publishing more and more videos, and it's a huge help if you subscribe. Thanks.